I just wrapped up an incredible conversation with fellow coach and leadership thinker Jeff Matlow. That episode is going to be airing next week, so be sure to follow this podcast so that you can get more on that particular conversation. But what he said in that conversation really prompted me to want to bring this to you today. And that is that imposter syndrome means that you're posturing, which means you're stepping into spaces where leadership is needed. And I thought, yes, that's exactly it. So we're going to cover imposter syndrome today, not from the perspective of detriment and struggle, but from the perspective of gift and feature of leadership. Welcome back to the Executive Exhale podcast. I'm Tammy, your executive coach, former public health leader and executive, and the creator of the Exhale Method, which is a somatic, science-based, and trauma-informed framework for stress-resilient leadership. It shows for leaders who are navigating high-pressure roles and want to do it with more clarity, calm, and connection, not by pushing harder, but by exhaling and leading from within. Today, we're diving into a topic that touches almost every leader I work with, whether they admit it or not, and that's the topic of imposter syndrome. You know that voice. I'm not qualified. They'll figure out I don't belong here. Who am I to lead? Well, here's the reframe. What if imposter syndrome wasn't a flaw at all, but a feature of great leadership? So let's start breaking it down. Imposter syndrome is that persistent self-doubt that we have. Even when you have the credentials, you have all the letters after your name, you have all the wins, you've gotten all the rewards and the awards, and you have the trust of your team. But you still get that uneasy feeling that somehow you've slipped through the cracks, or it's only a matter of time before they find out just who you are. It shows up in very high achievers, leaders, experts, scientists, especially those of us who come often from underrepresented or underestimated backgrounds. Us women are often victims of the imposter mindset. I felt it walking into boardrooms or into large meetings, often as the youngest executive in the room or maybe the least senior executive in the room. I felt it stepping on stage when I had to speak in front of hundreds at an event or at a conference when I was a keynote speaker. And yes, I've even felt it launching my business because now I'm guiding other leaders through their own healing and growth while I'm still doing my own healing and growth. But here's what I've learned. Imposter syndrome is often a sign that you care deeply. It means you're pushing the edges. It means you're expanding. It means that you're not coasting, but you're growing. So I want to circle back to Jeff's reframe from imposter to posturer, because I think this is really important and really deep. And by the way, if you want to know more about Jeff, like I've already advertised his podcast on his episode, but go to the best leadership podcast ever on Spotify, Apple, etc., and find him because he not only presents leadership material in a very eloquent way, but he does it with a sense of humor. And to Jeff, you're welcome for the additional endorsement here. But think about it. There's something very true about that reframe. Because when you feel like an imposter, it means that you're actually stepping into something perhaps a little unknown or that's stretching you in some way. So you're not pretending, you're becoming. You're not a fraud, you're a forerunner. Think about it. Great leadership doesn't come from knowing all the answers. We talked about that in our podcast episode. It comes from showing up anyways with humility and curiosity and courage and all the things. So imposter thoughts don't mean that you're failing. It means that you're leading at your edge, which you want to do because you want to be at that edge to be the most innovative and thoughtful and creative. So then how does imposter syndrome actually make you a stronger leader? Well, the first way is that it keeps you teachable, coachable even. That doubt keeps you learning, keeps you curious, which means that you're now open to feedback and growth and will be willing to pivot and switch out things when they need to be switched out. You can be more of a pragmatist. The second is that you lead with empathy because you know what it feels like to question yourself. You hold space for others who feel that too. The third thing is that you avoid the ego trap. You're less likely to bulldoze and more likely to trust when you have imposter syndrome. The fourth way that it can make you a better, stronger leader, and these points, by the way, were all mentioned by Jeff, and so I'm not making this up myself. This is just reiterating what we discussed, but it helps you to connect more authentically because you're showing a little more vulnerability. And being vulnerable doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you're connected. And people who feel connected to their leaders will follow them willingly, not by pushing, not by pulling, but they will willingly do it on their own because they feel that connection to you. Here's a question I'm going to ask you to ponder. So instead of asking yourself, how do I get rid of this imposter feeling? Which, by the way, many of my clients have asked me, like, how do I get rid of this? I don't, it's intolerable. Maybe the better question to ask yourself is, how can I lead with it, not try to get rid of it? Looking at imposter syndrome as a gift rather than a challenge to overcome. So here's how I help myself and my clients move through it when it comes up. So the first thing I always tell people is to pause and breathe. The most important thing is to regulate your nervous system, because when imposter syndrome comes up, your sympathetic nervous system, your flight, fight, fawn, freeze, is going to get activated. So the number one thing you can do for yourself is to regulate your nervous system and to ground back into your body, because you're not your fear. And the number one way you can do that is by breathing, particularly through the nose over 7, 8, 9 cycles, so that you can re-regulate your nervous system back into parasympathetic. The second way that I would invite you to walk through this for yourself is rooted in my history as an emergency room nurse back in the day when in my first career as a registered nurse. And that is asking yourself the question, what's actually at stake here? Usually the stuff you're doing in your office space is not life or death. Usually it's visibility, there's risk, there's vulnerability, but it's not life or death. So really look at the stake here of when this imposter syndrome shows up. And then ask yourself, well, what would a best friend or a mentor say if they were sitting right next to me right now? Because if you ask yourself that question, oftentimes we'll see others more clearly than we see ourselves. And then you can ask yourself, well, what's the next courageous step? Even if doubt doesn't go away, right? Even if this anxiety in my system still exists, then how do I move through it? What's the next courageous step? Because remember, courage isn't the absence of imposter syndrome. It's moving forward with it in your pocket. And finally, remember that imposter syndrome doesn't mean that you don't belong. It means simply that you're stepping into a bigger room and you're allowed to take up space there. You're allowed to grow in your power and in your self-assuredness. And the voice that says, hey, who do you think you are? Well, maybe that's the part of you that knows. Well, you're about to find out. All to say, you don't have to have it all figured out to make a difference. You don't need to feel 100% confident to show up powerfully. You just need to keep showing up. If you got anything out of this podcast today, make sure to like, follow, subscribe, comment, share, because all those things are free and they help get this content out to other leaders just like you. Until next time, folks, stay grounded, stay inspired, and remember to exhale.